a local firm looking at heavy transport with fuels and refueling stations. First Gas are looking at some trials in green hydrogen and whether that could run through some of the gas pipelines. There's industrial solar activities underway in the region, keen interest in bioenergy. Ariaki, the National Centre for New Energy Development, has been formed. WIT are taking a real leadership interest in energy training, and a range of other research projects are in play in the whole energy space. In farming and food production, the farming communities and farmers have come together to form the Taranaki catchment communities. It's a large umbrella grouping of the farmers, and within that are 13 catchment communities of farmers who are working together to front foot change in that space. In terms of looking at what else we could do in our food and fibre industry, a huge potential in Taranaki, of course, to really diversify and do additional things that could be grown and developed here. You may have noticed that there is kiwi fruit development here or returned to Taranaki. Avocados are really are being established much more sort of extensively in the region. There's investigations into botanicals to feed into our craft alcohol industry, medicinal plants for health, and many other aspects there. And in other areas, the development of the Taranaki crossing, great progress on predator-free initiatives, Power Up to do with encouraging our entrepreneurial ecosystem, the New Plymouth District Council Let's Go program, and I guess many of us are now encouraged to leave our cars a bit more at home, getting on our bikes. And I think we're all becoming a lot more conscious on the area of waste and packaging in some of those areas. So there's a bit more in some of those information and pamphlets on your desk here today. But what is really clear on reflection is that we are a region that is actively really trying to forge our way into the future, looking at change as an opportunity. And we're not really waiting passively for that to come. But it's imperative that we really accelerate the momentum, move it up a dial in terms of what is already underway. And hopefully with the connection with the evening tonight, it's an opportunity to take stock, to maybe think of some of our actions and how they could be maybe re-looked at, reimagined, some of those products and services or actions that you might want to start looking at. So now I'd like to hand back to Lauren to really introduce the real stars of the evening and set the scene for tonight. So thanks, Lauren.
Thanks so much, Anne. Just bear with me. Okay, so with all of that said and that sort of the scene set, I think we recognise that it's really important as business owners, public servants, we're a council-controlled organisation, or even just as individuals, we're always looking at different ways of innovating and moving forward. Tonight, we're going to explore how design thinking can be applied in different contexts to achieve the outcomes that we're seeking. When we think of design, I think what usually first springs to mind is graphic design, like a slick billboard or website, or maybe some really ergonomic and functional furniture design. But we can use design principles in lots of other applications to create products or systems or environments that serve us better, with less waste or a lighter environmental footprint, or in a more efficient or cost-effective way. So I'd like to welcome our speakers who have been invited tonight to spark some thought and conversation amongst us as to how we can design different aspects of our lives or businesses with real intention. They're going to hopefully give us some of those practical examples of how to apply design principles in real life. I'll also take a moment to mention that this series is called Taranaki 2050 in Conversation, so we absolutely encourage this to be a two-way dialogue. There'll be time at the end of each speaker, but also time at the end for a wrap-up sort of Q&A session. So please don't be shy. Let's challenge our guests, really put the acid on them. So first up, we have Tristam Sparks. He's a senior lecturer in interaction design and contextual studies at the School of Design in Wellington. Sorry, I had to read that out because I will forget what it is. Tristam's professional experience includes user experience design and strategy for startups, corporations, and social activism. This evening, he's going to take us through some of the basics of design principles, human-centered design, and transition design, which will be highly interesting and relevant for us, given the just transitions approach Anne's just sort of mentioned that we adopted when developing Taranaki 2050. So please welcome Tristam.
Thank you, Lauren. And thank you, Venture Taranaki, for bringing me up from Wellington. It's been really good to visit your city once again. It also puts me in an unfortunate situation of being the person to introduce the people from the local region. So the foreigner goes first. Okay. So thanks for that, Lauren. I'm going to talk actually a little bit more about design process than I am design principles. And I think that it's really important for us to understand the difference between those two. And we can talk about what maybe a design principle might be later on. So yes, this is Pukeahu, strong historical ties with the Taranaki region. This is the design campus, block 12 or Tiara Hihiko on the left. The Campianao, or the Old Dominion Museum building there in the background, and our brand new marae that just opened recently. Now, I just want to talk about this picture for a little bit, just for a couple of reasons. First of all, you see 3 layers of history in Aotearoa, New Zealand. You see 2 traditions, one that has modernized, or both which have modernized completely. And it starts to talk about also my interests in terms of what I think design can be and should be. I represent a subject major at the School of Design called Integrated Design, which is a way for students to combine lots of different perspectives and modes of making. Because as Lauren said in her introduction, design really is sort of typically thought of as just making, but we need to think about it in terms of making time or occupation of people's time, experiences, as well as the translation of one era to a next, or the transition. So I will skip over this because we've already had a little bit of an introduction on that, but I just want to point out this picture. I think it's really fantastic that you have a bunch of people who have made this illustration for maybe one reason. Is that perspective from today to the past, and looking through the landscape and the city where you're actually like looking to what things can be. So most of my talk is actually going to be talking about how those processes can be used to make this happen. So a quick slideshow here for you. A lot of these things when you're talking about 2050, you're talking a long time away, right? Or maybe it's not, maybe it's just around the corner. But a lot of these processes talk about consultation, and it feels like, there's so many opinions to go through. How do we manage that? I just want to point out through these slides that New Zealand Aotearoa already did it and didn't think about all the complexity of the things that we needed to do. Wellington, of course, like all communities in this country, was disrupted overnight. And we didn't question it, we did it because we had to, for our communities and for each other. Other communities did it as well, and this is where design comes in. This is where things start to manifest. This is a couple of images from Singapore. You might have noted this from around the world or around your region yourself. But then there's also a little bit of this design fiction or speculation or how it transforms our engagement with the world. I'm just going to assume that you've read that. The giggles suggest that you have. Here's another problem that we haven't thought of, is we are introducing stuff into our economies, into our communities all the time that has unforeseen impacts. So our friend Alan Kay, who was a computer scientist, said in 1971, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And he obviously adapted somebody else's words. But I think that there's a lot of truth to that. If you are first moving, you are setting standards for other people. So futures, I mean, the slide could actually be labeled change as much as the future. But let's think a little bit about what we think of when we think of the future. What do we think of, right? It's something really personal, or it's something that is maybe Elon Musk flying into space and hopefully staying there. Really, we're going to look at this kind of the standard where, which was set up by the United States after World War II. This is Norman Bell Geddes. This is Futurama. It was displayed at the 1939 New York World's Fair. And when we think about these kind of like slick visions of the future, we don't typically take into account all the problems that that model of the future has given us, right? I mean, I'm a sucker for a skyscraper just like anyone. And yeah, a decent highway, decent road, yeah, it's a good thing too. But I also want to point out that this is the designer, people like myself and my colleagues here, making up your mind about what's going to happen next. And that's a bit crazy. We can't really do Norman Bell Geddes and the General Motors Corporation dictating our future anymore. But you know, 1939, same thing happened here, right? So this is Orangatai in Wellington. This is the New Zealand Centennial Exhibition, 1939. Slick piece of architecture. And here it is from above. Really amazing. Oh, I really wish that thing was still alive. I mean, it's got all sorts of sort of problems in terms of where the ideas came from, but at the same time, it's like, there's some vision there, isn't there? But here's why I'm also showing this to you. Because that map to the left is the information that was released by some colleagues at Victoria University. And over on the left is all the subsidence in the land and the projected increase of sea level change. So even if that was there, we're going to have to move real quick to protect it. Also, of course, the other thing that disrupted that little model is, well, there's an airport top left. So while we're on the subject of residue and transition, one of the only things that I'm aware of that has remained is this statue of Kupe and his various crewmates. This is done also in 1939 by an English or Christchurch, I'm not sure, sculptor, also in 1939. So the thing that we least expected to survive has survived. The other little thing that I want to talk about in transition is this kind of, I've done this little sketch for you. The Anthropocene, hopefully everybody has sort of come across that term, where human beings are the most powerful and most centralized unit that actually has the ability to change the planet. But if we look at this image just as a kind of like a sort of metaphorical Garden of Eden or proto-history, prehistory, what we've discovered over the years is that we've just built up so much infrastructure that separates us from the land that we don't even really have to think about it anymore, right? So if each one of those circles is kind of like keeps us separate from the land, then we need, as designers and as communities, to break through them. And the slide's missing, so you're not getting the point, but that's okay. Because we really do need to start talking about something that's a little bit more wicked. All right. I mean, I think I'm in a safe crowd here where we can sort of accept that this might be part of the local lexicon. I'm not sure. Wicked problems is a concept brought up in the 1970s about how some things cannot be solved. And this is how we basically measure them. This is how from 1972, 1973 onwards to this day, it is still being described using this framework of 10 items. Just look at one or two of them. We can flick back to it later on. But one thing I want to get you to look at is the one at the bottom. Every wicked problem is connected to others. So you solve one problem and all of a sudden you've started another half dozen. So what has design got to do with about all of this? 1972, okay, things are starting to fall apart a little bit. Design needs to change. It needs to get away from the Norman Bell Geddes. It needs to get into something like this from 2018 and the Design Council in the UK. We're talking about the double diamond. What you're looking at here is a mental model of how design is done contemporarily. What designers do when they don't know what to do, or when the problem is so big that they actually have to start with don't know or could be over on the left, and move through a divergent sort of process of like, hey, here's all the ideas we could do. So on the left-hand diamond, you've got discover and define, like finding out what you need to do before the right-hand diamond where you decide how you are going to solve a problem. Another one, empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. This is much easier to understand. This is the design model from the D School at Stanford University in the United States, literally called design thinking. I'm going to stay away from that term. Human-centered design, and it's a little bit more easier to understand in context. Because this is from a research project I did with a colleague of mine, where you start, and it was about creating an application to crowdsource emergency material before you needed it. So it was an application design. But it's really important to think about, because you think about how much wealth that most communities sit on that actually owned by somebody else and is inaccessible in a crisis. So understanding what is the problem, definition, what context are we talking about, idea generation, where the designer starts going mad with Post-its. Bottom left, do a prototype, get some real people to look at it. When I mean real people, I don't mean condescendingly as like they're not normally real people. I mean people who are familiar with the situation or at least are brand new to it and can tell you what they think. Then testing and then prototype. But really what happens is, and this is the cute thing about a lot of these diagrams, is that they look very formulaic, but ultimately what happens is something more like that, right? It's absolutely bedlam. So what does all this mean? Is really that we're starting to just talk about, or have been for the past 2 decades, talking about how designers need to work based on how people feel, the old brand management kind of stuff. But then to start to talk about behavioral change, all this kind of really uncomfortable stuff where designers are trying to get you to, they used to get you to buy something, now they want you to stop driving your car on particular days because, like in the oil crisis in the late 1970s, the gas was too expensive, right? And how much are we talking about now once the government lifts their taxes off? And all of this happens across time, how they understand. Co-design is another really important thing. I'm not sure how I'm doing for time. 5 minutes? Okay, cool. I'm going to whip through this. This is Charles Eames. Anyone who loves mid-modern design should have heard of this individual. We're talking about the overlaps between a designer, a community, and interests, right? Like, I like cars, so therefore I'm going to design them. That's simple. But within that, we need to start looking at observation. And this is my first student project that I've got here today, is I get students to think about sustainability and unsustainability in terms of things that they come into contact with every day. It's not quite clear on this because I wasn't, it's too hard to edit this particular video, but what you're looking at here is a student's impression or understanding of how do you make something from scratch versus calling up Uber Eats, okay? What is more sustainable? And once you address that question, I'm not going to try and steer you and say, oh, McDonald's is so unsustainable. What if there's actually some details in there that is better than farm fresh eggs delivered to your door or however you get them? So this is Harmony Rapier as a project. She was a MDes student from 2018, sorry, and she did something really amazing for GNS, talking about the Hikurangi Trench off the east coast of the North Island. And she was looking at her own community in Gisborne and making sure that everybody understood that get long, if it's long and strong, get gone, actually means something. So Harmony came up something, she worked with her iwi and hapu in a co-design practice to, and that's that video there at top left, is to actually come up with a community-driven practice or a community-driven solution to help local people come to an understanding of what the threats were from tsunami in that area. And this was her result. It was a speculative piece of design, a po whenua, but a po whenua that was connected to seismographs. So a really interesting idea because you're mixing cultures up there as well and actually getting them to work together. Gonna flick through that one. We might come back to that later on because it talks about speculation. Transition design. Historical president here, cartoonist Robert Crumb. If you're online, I would suggest you maybe screen capture that, have a look at it for later. But what's important here is that you can see top left, the verdant green untouched lands of the United States turn into something that we didn't really think about at the end. Sustainability, what is it? It's a combination of social, environmental, and economic terms. But that's not good enough just to look at those Venn diagrams. We need to also think in terms of time and how, where we are right now, where Taranaki is right now, where New Plymouth is right now, how is it going to get to that future? Which future is it going to be? Transition design, I think I'll show you rather than go through that. But theory of change is also important. This is where my interest in activism comes in. Making sure, like it's not just good enough to say, hey, everybody buy a Tesla. Because they're too expensive, first of all. Well, okay, your mileage may vary. But they're also, you need to change your behaviors. It can't just be about swapping one resource intensive vehicle for another, right? You've got to get some behavioral change. Creative Ecologies is a class that I run that a lot of the next stuff comes from. Now, this is the brief that the students get to advance your understanding of the design process so that it includes promotion and incorporation of sustainability. What does sustainability mean in this case? It means materials and or use patterns. Transition design, through time to a goal or further inflection. That further inflection is really important because you might not get where you want to go in the first point, right? So you got to try again. And then within ecologies, specific living and interactive contexts, right? Because we all have impact on our lands. And this is how the students start to address it. This is an ecological plan to bring awareness and appreciation of the land with a certain setup that actually includes a lot of the details that change your behavior over time. Small incremental changes to the land over time. Also really important because she's including ideas of how to measure whether she's been successful or not. Now, this is all speculation. You can't get an undergraduate to change the world in 12 weeks, but you can give them a start. Here's a really geeky one. Let's de-future Oriental Bay. Let's de-future the beach. Let's get rid of that Nelson sand and let's return it to its natural state. Somebody was looking at reducing waste in construction. Their particular level of interest was using software to do so. But the whole point of these diagrams is that there's multiple outcomes. The student is thinking about a whole lot of different outcomes and then implementing the one that they can do for that particular moment. I love this one. It's not finished yet, but at the same time, it's like, why are we going to mow down our forests and cover them with solar farms? So the student is looking at relationships between making solar farms, for example, more suitable for, almost done. Okay. Okay, fashion, secondhand clothes. Let's make them trendy again. Government transport fleets. All these government cars are sitting around and no one's using them. Couldn't we do an Uber thing with them? So some caveats, and this is where I'm finishing, is researchers and designers are not necessarily the same thing. We need experts in these conversations. Defuturing is really important because, as I was mentioning before, we typically end up with problems we didn't know were problems when we made them in the first place. So you get to the future and you go, oh no, there's all this like old empty mines lying around and dead plastic. What are we going to do? So this is really important, and I'll leave it here. So we design our world while our world acts back on us and designs us as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tristam. That was fantastic. Does anybody have any questions immediately following Tristam's presentation, or we can wait to the end? Wait to the end, eh? Next up, we have Michael Perrett. Michael is a co-founder of the Green School here in Taranaki, in Okura, and states that his ultimate current challenge is being to turn wonderful young learners into influential green leaders that will create a more sustainable future for us all. Prior to the Green School, Michael co-founded HRV, growing it into a 25-office franchise before exiting the business and investing in companies ranging from insurance to nanotechnology, farming to IT hosting. So please welcome Michael.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much to Venture Taranaki for putting on our event this evening and publishing the 2050 roadmap. It's interesting upon reflection of what is a really new image that we already are compelled to draw new coastline features on that map. As a matter of fact, we're standing in the Plymouth Sports Fishing and Underwater Club, and you can look forward to that as well. Okay, so yeah, this is going to have to either learn to float or adapt. Imagine the founders of this wonderful club that I've been a member of and enjoyed being here this evening. So I hope you're all enjoying the extended period of fine weather. So I was born and raised in Taranaki. I was lucky enough to find Rachel at Massey University, and together we have tried our very, very best to improve our children's future. We've founded several successful, disruptive organisations in multiple sectors. Together we decided, through providing choice and education, about the same time as the descent of our appalling youth statistics, we founded Green School International and then Green School New Zealand to be part of the solution. I do declare on our behalf that building schools is hard. I'll skip a lot of the detail for you. Excuse me for rushing, there's quite a lot. Today, let's focus on doing design, right? Execution, delivery, who, how, why. And I'd like to thank Tristram for providing all of the academic resources one would possibly need in this area and inspiring me this evening. I'm here today to generalize. We're going to go flat out, just like all of our projects, and try to time travel. I'm going to try to focus on neuroarchitecture, the psychology of a building, if you wish, and thereafter intentional design. Our goal when we set up the designs for our campus was that when learners looked around, looked up, they would know that someone cared enough to build beauty into the campus. Now, I want you all to know, and I hope I make this point this evening, that has inspired unbelievable behaviour in our young people, and we keep track of that as well against national standards. The impacts of our buildings. Our number one social media channel post is always our buildings. It's strange because we're doing a whole lot of other stuff, but people love to look at, admire, and be part of the architecture that we have created. And that results in visits, improvements, and expectations on our brand, and intent and income. Nobody in Taranaki was integrating the SDGs in the construction industry before we arrived. That was before. It was another time completely. Man, how we have progressed. Mass timber, early child education, investment, marvelously inspiring buildings sprinkled around Aotearoa. Digital design, modular construction, new insulation standards, hooray! And of course, a second look at ventilation, my favorite. Construction waste to landfill reductions are happening now. We're getting ideas built. So what I want to focus on is how you can do what other people are talking about. So inquiry, mana whenua, and everything in between. Turn over those stones and you can be occupied for a lifetime. We do not roll the stone back over for convenience, okay? So this here you see is a carefully crafted clay model of the 3D drone topography. So a merging of technology and practicality. Everybody can be included in the design process, especially those who learn differently, those of different intelligences. Our goals on this land was to tread lightly. Green School Farm had enormous opportunities and also responsibilities. We tried to place buildings perfectly. Oh my gosh, Resource Management Act. Anyway, everyone get comfortable. We're next to a significant natural beauty, a national park, one of the first in the world. We're releasing kiwi, oh my gosh, whio in our river, 25 metres from that river. Permission is sought, archaeological studies, 3 waters before it was cool, soil and water testing, biodiversity studies with TRC, amazing, infrastructure, fire, energy report studies commissioned, all everywhere. The goal was to get a clean slate. It was a planning nightmare, but fun. We started with the overlay of the sections. Can everyone see the 90 sections that were stamped on top of it, and the paper roads, which just go off into space and are completely unmakeable? But we purchased those on all of our behalf and cleaned them up. And now we have something that's going to compete with the $160,000 worth of rural production that our 121-acre farm produced before we took it over. We are currently contributing 10 times that to our immediate community and vastly more, but we'll leave those numbers for people that are smarter than me. The school river runs through the middle of the Awakura Awa runs right through the middle of our school. If you see that as a health and safety risk, then you shouldn't enroll your children in Green School. It's much, much more than that. Come and have a look, we'll explain. Native species throughout And it all started with a single flax flower and a tui that previously had nowhere to land when it was a dairy farm. 7 years of care led to us having an advantage. The Washer family were gentle on this land. There's only ever been chicken manure spread on it, and it was not intensive, it was gently prepared. This is one of 3 precinct master plans that we commissioned. Every time we printed one, we had to change, but that's one of the green school skills, which is flex like flax. So there's a number of activities happening there simultaneously, and I removed 72 other projects that overlay this diagram for your reading pleasure. The next image is another master plan. So we just keep on going, keep on going. The original master plan done by Ibuku and the wonderful team there is still only one of 4 master plans. Although if I showed you an exact replica of the current infrastructure, it's very, very similar to this. So we stuck by our guns if you wish. This is what impossible looks like. Just in case you thought we were describing a always attainable dystopian future. No, this is where the project came to a screaming halt. An inspiring declaration, intentionally different, innovative, the school in the sky, ladies and gentlemen. So we weren't even going to bother with any concrete, including foundations, and these pylons suspending the school off the ground in high density nets was to mimic the Kaitaki Ranges behind them. When you show people design like this, they sit up and take notice or run away. That's how you select your team to deliver it. 140-page design brief from 4 suppliers and collaborators that we shelved and started again from fresh with local suppliers. How and why to, we maintain the pure intent of this, and stubbornly I suggest you too hold on to your vision as it is skewered and squeezed by absolutely every force you can imagine, including common sense sometimes. Expect and plan for challenges if it's worth doing. Surround yourselves with people who are smarter than you. Hence why I identified Tristam immediately. Green School New Zealand, why build beauty? First, it's important to know that our expectations of our learners and their understandings are no different than top New Zealand or international schools. We expect our learners will leave our school and be able to enter tertiary education industry or commerce at the highest levels. We need to emphasize this top academic pursuit, the academic rigor that's instilled in our school by the best educators from the largest, most successful schools in the world. And where are these children going to go? So we have alternative assessment techniques and qualifications. They're global in nature and they correspond with the changes that are happening around us. The top 4 companies in the world no longer need a bachelor degree from a known university in order to indulge your ego. What Stanford University has just announced is a sustainability school sponsored by a Silly Valley folk of $1.1 billion. That is the school we're going to go to, including hopefully a biodiversity university right here in Taranaki, right? What makes us unique? It's how we learn, not what we learn. Hundreds of studies have documented the benefits of being able to see, interact, reference nature, and to take a walk outside and to be in nature. Human health, human well-being. These benefits may be physical, they may reduce stress, they may improve hospital recovery times. How many more research projects do you think we need as a team to start to address this stuff? Why is it all important? Well, the research says blah, blah, blah. And who's reading it? What does it mean to you? Are you compelled? What's your cause? Do you have a passion? So much research to compel us to do the right thing the first time. My dad would call it common sense like. In October 2021, the Human Rights Council adopted resolutions recognizing that clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a human right, and I founded a business when I was a kid that delivered that to 250,000 New Zealand homes. Interesting facts. In Canada, doctors are prescribing outside, get outside, go and get on the skateboard, have a walk. We hear about nature bathing, nature solos, forest bathing, walk in the park. How are we integrating that into our designs, into the purpose of our built environment? I've got here numerous studies. So those Canadian doctors are showing us the way. Some countries are declaring by law children should be let outside. Some of my colleagues have joked, those with higher profiles than me, that the schools are made of the same materials as the prisons. And the prisoners get 2 hours of outdoor courtyard time per day. And in some cases, our children get 1 or less. If it's raining, we wear red band gumboots, appropriate rainwear, and get in amongst it. So, eco-anxiety, you can feel it. We're turning that into agency. Our children are thriving with purpose, okay? We're not blaming them, we're inspiring them. It's a different presentation altogether. So the children are going to populate those decision-making tables and change the world for us. And we have lots of examples of that, especially someone like Clover Hogan, who is again addressing eco-anxiety, okay, and turning that into agency. Some more things that make Green School New Zealand unique. Number one thing is, if you visit and you see something that is not unique and that is familiar, can you let me know? And then tomorrow I'm going to change it immediately, no doubt. We're intentionally different. Okay, we're integrating well-being since 2012, 2000, and earlier than that, when Green School won the greenest school on earth. Mindfulness, reflection, appetite, appreciation for culture, and awareness are baked in like the SDGs. We were there when they were announced. We rallied for COP. Our 18-year-olds entered the presentation hall and lobbied for inclusion, and we had that granted. So we're not just telling you about these concepts, we are generating and participating radically. The well-being that is core to creating positive, interactive, enhanced learning environments. At this point, we ask our learners what they appreciate about Green School New Zealand, and they often say it's relationships, calmness, kindness of the learners and staff. As a result, we have virtually, listen to this, 0 discipline issues or behavioural issues. We've had over 100 children through the school. We currently have a roll of about 78, but even if you do that on a per capita, we win, right? We've achieved our goal. You name it, we can show you what's happening. We haven't had any exclusions from our community. Why mind? Why mind? The state of the world's children, and the UN report estimates that 1 in 7 adolescents aged 10 to 19 is estimated to live with a diagnosed mental disorder globally. Kind of used that, and I was apprehensive to use our own, which is way worse. New Zealand, we lead that, unfortunately. Let's circle back and address New Zealand's dirty little secrets and our worsening youth stats. Looking at these well-being drivers is critical to making the magic at Green School. It even sounds different inside, around our buildings. Okay, the pitch, tone of the youngsters is different. What makes Green School New Zealand unique? integrated entrepreneurship. You don't have to be Richard Branson and celebrate your dyslexic thinking and open way too many businesses, but you can explore your own enterprise concepts. You can take action, experiential understanding, take risks. And for those that would like me to package that up, it's like when you asked, why am I learning this? And no one was able to answer you. You choose what you learn, so it's a much simpler explanation. Learners learn an appreciation that change will require an entrepreneurial action. Learners have to understand how our economic world works if they are to affect change and take action. Who reckons that our children should be taught about rates, tax, interest, mortgages? What about the fact that when you take out a 20-year mortgage, you're taking out on a product that only lasts 10 years by guarantee? We should tell them about that. Right, let's so focus on passion. Creativity. My passion has changed, by the way, if you're wondering where that comes from. Depth of understanding, finding your personal interest and finding your expertise. So we are curating an individual learning route for every single one of our learners. Okay, not because they're not necessarily served by or access to the functioning industrial model, okay, but because we're just offering an alternative choice. It's just another choice, that's all. Our motto is Thrive with Purpose. So this is helping learners find their own interests, explore their interests, and develop their own expertise. When we get older learners, let's say senior class, we ask them a very uncomfortable question. We ask them what they would like to learn. And sometimes we have to manage the emotions that come out of that request because they've never been asked before ever. Because listening and being beautiful and sitting to the back of the class and disappearing in plain sight are all the skills that they've needed up until the day we ask that question. We prize creativity, experiential and exploratory learning, and we lead the world in applying these previous concepts. A survey of 22,000 high school students by Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, that's right, there is such a thing, found that on average, students reported feeling negative emotions such as stress, fatigue, and boredom 75% of the time. At Green School New Zealand, the learners create their own paths, literally. We build the building and the children transport their bodies around that, putting paths on the ground that we build later. So, and briefly on collaborative design, it's messy as. Collaborative planning is even messier and expensive. Co-design is nearly impossible when you're trying to bring different elements of community together, but we do it, and we do it really, really well and to the best of our ability, and it's worth it, and it yields fabulous results. Right, future focused. Responding to the challenges of our time, we're working to create a sustainable planet. If we want our graduates to be the world famous alum that Green School is renowned for, then they cannot learn sustainable studies in an example of an unsustainable building. Containment concrete is not going to work and is not going to create authentic learning experiences. Phase one, the waka, okay, these buildings were inspired by a colleague of mine, the founder of Green School, John Hardy, who said, make sure you build walllessness. Okay, so this gentleman's famous for saying stuff that nobody else understands or has ever considered before. It was like, make sure you create a parking farm. What is a parking farm other than a farm with fruit trees that the children can pick their lunch from? Biomimicry, very, very important here, but more importantly in the mimicry area is that somebody else is inspired to use mass timber. Somebody else puts a curve for fear of what angles will do to the emotional well-being of the children. They have to perceive it. Joy and beauty was the brief we were given by those who inspired this school a long time ago. I want you to know that the circular, elliptical, you name it, was absolutely intentional. It was delivered on time and on budget. And we're very, very pleased to tell you we took a dairy farm to a fully functioning school that was at capacity in 9 months with local companies. So anyone who tells us that it takes forever, it costs more, isn't necessarily active in the industry. Here, there's my twins enjoying the angular nature of the building over perhaps what a standard one might look like. These are 3 of our waka in place, glowing like natural, familiar elements, pods and or pupae. The weather is an asset to the way we learn. At Green School, it brings different light layers and different temperatures. We can relate to the power of nature just by stepping outside, and we cannot ignore the variations that we get there. Right, here you see a learning space. We struggle. Is it a school? Can we call that a classroom? No naughty corners. Check that out. None, right? No containment. No putting in the cupboard. Well-rounded children, increased engagement, improved learning incomes, 0 harm incidents. This is an example of human-centric lighting. We know that lighting does induce and manage and influence mood. Okay, so we're looking into this. These are just Philip Hue bulbs. They're commonly available, no problem. A little bit pricey at $100, but they can create some magic for the children. We don't do murals and paint the walls blue and be done with it at Green School New Zealand. Okay, we've also addressed heating hydronically, ventilation, and the highest performing insulation that we could find. Here is a kinna, or the New Zealand sea urchin, you'll excuse me. It was the beginning of our current phase 2 building project. Nobody in the team investigated these shapes when they declared we were going to build a kinna. So it wasn't until I sent these down the line that we started to look to nature for design prompts. The ego available was blocking the serendipity and the synchronicity that ensued after we disarmed ourselves. So we've used state-of-the-art materials. We've encouraged industry and sector adoption. And inside these learning spaces, we have nanofiber air filtration, okay, that actively deactivates coronavirus and acoustic attenuation. This is the entrance to the kinna, or the atrium, and it's meant to crane your neck when you and as you enter. Again, a wave, a feeling inspired by anti-clastic grid shell construction that's not viable in New Zealand. Woven pine, okay, a celebration of pine, the equivalent in New Zealand to bamboo. Some more issues, some more renderings, buildings resembling still these original aspirations and goals. So these are the original renderings, and what I deliver to you at the opening, do come along, it's going to be fabulous. Okay, is a building that's going to look very similar to that. These are some of the interior spaces. Who wants to enroll? We have yet to complete the fit out, but we invite you all to look at how you might contribute to these spaces and welcome yourself into our community. This is how things work out when you put design first. Everything should begin with design. Green School New Zealand skills that resembled here is thinking in systems. So the technology allowed us to view the buildings in place virtually. We used augmented reality goggles to achieve this. I like the question, what is that? That's not a classroom. Classrooms are rectangular, glazed on the north side, and contain rows of seats. Here we have Taranaki, or perhaps even New Zealand's first truly geometric shape. You can see it folding and concaving and convexing as it sweeps over the roof. That is intentional, it is difficult, but it is not impossible. So, I'd like to thank very much VT for hosting the event, Mana Whenua who guide us at Green School New Zealand, our world-class advisory board, John and Cynthia Hardy, the Green School Bali founders, Neil Thomas from Attilio One, Laura Hardy of Ibuku Studios, Boone, BTW and Nagel Consulting for doing the impossible, Cleland's Construction, Livingston Building Limited for their bravery, passion and invoices. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions.
Any questions for Michael quickly before we move on, or we can wait till the end again? Thanks very much, Michael. Last but not least, of course, we have Bena Denton and Dan Woolley. Bena and Dan are the founders of Greenbridge, one of New Zealand's leading permaculture and regenerative design consultancies, specialising in the design of healthy homes and sustainable landscapes. They're going to chat to us tonight about how intentional building and landscape design can benefit communities into the future, and how regenerative design thinking can be applied to community projects. So take it away, Bena and Dan. Sure.
Few of us, we're going to tag team a little bit, so we'll see how this goes. I generally wave my arms around, so we'll see. But we need this for Zoom. All right. This is our little button. Which one are we pressing? The green. Okay. Yeah, cool. Can you guys hear me okay? It's always echoes a little bit. Yeah, kia ora koutou. Thanks for coming this evening. So as Laura said and introduced, I'm Bena and I'm an ecological landscape designer. And my husband here and co-director, Daniel, is a healthy home specialist. So we actually have 4 in our team, but we're here to speak to you tonight. And part of what our skill base is that we're multidisciplinary. And Dan will talk a little bit more to that, because it's about thinking about outside the square and how we design, solve environmental problems, I guess you would say. So just one quick thing before we move into some really great design examples, which Laura has asked us to talk about tonight, because this is what we do on a daily basis. We use design practice intentionally to create sustainable futures. And yeah, so we do healthy homes, regenerative landscapes and community resilience. And we started on the smell of an oily rag. There was no examples of what is a sustainable design consultancy. 10 years ago, no one was doing it. So we made lots of mistakes and it took a long time to kind of get momentum and grow up. But around 5 years ago, I don't know if you guys felt it, kind of like that shift in sustainable thinking, and people became more aware. I'm seeing some nodding heads, yeah. So when that happened, we were really well placed with our processes and our experience to do some really cool projects, and we walk all around New Zealand now. So we're going to show you some of the design principles that we use in our work that you guys can take away. Yeah, cool. I'll pass you over to Dan.
Kia ora koutou, ko pūhanga tōhora te maunga, ko tāhiki te awa, ko hokianga te moana, ko ngāpuhi te iwi, ko Daniel Woolley tōko ingoa. My name's Daniel Woolley, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you to VT for inviting us. I thought this was a great image that I found on the internet this afternoon. It looks a little bit like a dystopian New Plymouth. Within the contemporary predominant culture, we've been operating within a thought monoculture. And I think we've been hearing a little bit about that from the Green School. And that's leading us towards a destination that's not only unsustainable, but it's extremely undesirable. And why is that? Why is it there? So I think quite a few of you may have seen this before, the difference between egocentric thinking and ecocentric thinking. The diagram on the left shows humans at the top of a pyramid and everything flows from them. Whereas ecocentric thinking is understanding that we're part of an ecosystem and looking to respect that. So any other ideas of why it is that we've got this thought process of monoculture and heading? If you've got any ideas, shout them out. Otherwise, I'll just keep on flicking up ideas on the screen. Because we've always done it. Yep. Industrial Revolution. Any other ideas? Very good. It feels so good to be on top. We won't read in too much to that. So, disconnect. We've talked about that earlier this evening. That's a big part of what's driving it. Disconnect from nature, disconnect from our communities, disconnect from our spirit, whatever that means, and disconnect from our communities. Separateness, that's where it's coming from as a culture, a thought process. Centralization, that's a wonderful thing, that one there. So, money is king, and a growth mindset. Everything has to be done. We must continue growing at all costs. So, this is a pretty famous guy, Albert Einstein. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So, Greenbridge is a values-based business. We're an impact enterprise, which essentially is any organisation that uses tools of business to affect positive social and environmental change. On the left there, you'll see a simplified impact diagram that we created to think about and clarify for ourselves what we're about. We're about healthy people and planet. We do that in 4 ways: regenerative landscapes, healthy homes, connected communities, and sustainability education. There's a far more complicated one, but I didn't want to give you guys a headache. So that's the simplified version. The challenge that I put to all businesses and organizations is to move beyond growth and money mindset and make values and which lead towards positive and social change at the core of what they do and who they are. In fact, some of the most important work we can do is to develop and work towards shared visions of a positive future. And so thank you to the Green School for helping to develop some of that. Because if we haven't envisioned what a positive future might look like, it's very difficult to build upon it. Working against that dystopian future that I showed at the first slide, that Hollywood's so keen to keep on showing us, all the different versions of a future that none of us want. One solution being to look backwards in order to look forward. In Aotearoa, we are fortunate to have Te Ao Māori to help us understand a different worldview. With tangata whenua, translating to people of the land, this is a culture that has fostered deep relationship with their environment, which is extremely intimate and based on ancestry of maunga, awa, and moana. And that's why at the introduction of most mihi, that's what you're hearing first. This is actually talking about the ancestors of the people, and tangata whenua are literally representatives, and mana whenua are literally representatives of the land they come from and look after and steward. There are many approaches to learn from Te Ao Māori, manaakitanga, being compassion, kaitiakitanga, guardianship, kotahitanga, togetherness, which can provide signposts towards a more sustainable approach forward. We need to learn to think differently and draw upon multiple tools to co-create our changing world together.
Cool. Is anyone familiar with permaculture? Little bit, lot bit? Yep, great, cool, that's awesome. So the basis of the design principles that underpin our work is permaculture. So we don't often put ourselves out there and say we're permaculturalists or permaculture designers, because we have to unpack that. A lot of people don't understand what it is. So we use the term ecological or sustainable because people have become quite familiar with that. But fundamentally, permaculture underpins our work. So I saw lots of hands up and nods, so you're relatively familiar with this. So we have the ethics that drive it. Sustainability is not just about principles, it's about values, how we make decisions based on those values. And of course, we have the 12 principles that imbue our work, but also anybody can do that. It's not rocket science. You know, as Dan's saying, you can look back to the past, and that's what permaculture does. We're just reintroducing things that work very practically. Yeah. Bill Mollison. Yeah, so I've got a lot of books over here. You can have a look at those, because what we do is, yeah, as I say, we're not reinventing the world. You can take these principles and apply them to your own life. and projects. Is that one? Yeah, cool. And then the other one is regenerative principles or regenerative ag. This particular slide's about regen ag. So we do a lot of landscape design, and we're incorporating carbon sequestration and fodder belts and shelter and biodiversity corridors, etc. So we use a lot of regenerative agricultural principles as well in our work. We've got a fantastic Nicole Masters. If you haven't read her book, she's great. Community design examples. You up first on that or me? Yeah, I can't remember. We'll tag team. So this is John Way. We thought we'd pop this project in first because it's actually local. It's a New Plymouth-based pocket neighbourhood. This is a really early project we worked on, just 6 buildings, but also the community space that links and ties them together. So pocket neighbourhoods have particular design principles, again, that underpin and kind of designs itself in a way for community projects. If you pop to the next slide, Dan, do you want to? Oh, jump one. Yep.
Yeah, so on any design project, part of it is about responding to the energy flows of the site. In terms of simple things like sun, like wind and orientation, but it can be unpacked further to a greater understanding of habitat, surrounding ecosystems, and finding the meeting point between the needs of the people that are going to inhabit the space and what the land can support. So that's what we're looking to do. So this is just a few photos up on the, actually I'll get my little pointer. Up on the top left, you've got the entry to John Way. This was originally going to be just a standard right-of-way subdivision, and we came along when it had already started and said, we think we can help you do better. So it's not a perfect example. It still has driven access through the middle, which a pocket neighbourhood should avoid. But you'll see the houses all come out onto a shared space. It's got layering, which, did you want to talk about the layering, or shall I just knock it out? So the layering is happening from a landscape point of view right through to the house. So on the outside, you've got public space. In this instance, the driven access does go through the neighbourhood, so that's been purposely slowed. Through confusion and through curve and proximity to potential pedestrians. So you've got the public space out here, then you've got semi-public, so you've got porches. So if someone's wanting to interact with their neighbours, they might go sit out on the porch. And one of the really exciting things is, even when we went here on the opening evening, people were already sitting out there having a chat on the porch. And since we've been back several times, the neighbours have told us it's the most community they've ever felt. They do go to each other's place for dinner, etc. And there's no shared buildings, individually owned titles, but just through simple design structure, we're able to support community interaction. So as we go in past here, we've got fences which you can see through to more private spaces of personal decks, but still have views out to the main shared space. And as we go inside, so you've got your porch here on one of the homes. As you go inside to a living area, you've got views out through windows from the kitchen and living to that shared space. So if you see something out here there that you want to go and jump in on, you can. As you move further back through the house to the bedrooms, it becomes totally private.
So I just want to reiterate that, Dan and I didn't invent these principles. These are pocket neighbourhood principles. And I think that's part of what Lauren wanted us to get to talk about, is that you can take these design approach and apply it to any community. Yeah. This one is it's called Benoli Gardens in Auckland. It's 115 apartments that we were brought on by Malcolm Rand, actually, from EcoStore and Ockham Residential. And this is just one of the concepts. We had a number of them that we explored in terms of design process. And it was a very ecological response to the site. Again, the car is corralled. There is, little pocket parks up in the top there. I don't know if you can point there, Dan. Yep. There's a central community space, and there's community buildings and infrastructure as well for little cafes and coffee carts, etc. So yeah, there's a few photos, I think, of that one, isn't there? Yeah. Yeah, cool. So these are the regenerative principles that we've applied. All sorts. I won't go into them in detail, but creating bird and habitat corridors, that was very important for Hobsonville Point Road. It was part of the requirements, so that was great. We fitted really well into that. Rainwater harvesting, corralling the car, producing a yield. There's community gardens, there's bump spaces. You know, in a bump space, I don't know if you're familiar with that, it's creating intentional spots where people can bump and have those little conversations. How are you doing? You know, what are your kids up to? Oh, I'll bring you something over here if you're not well. You know, those sorts of bump spaces designed intentionally. Yep. And this is at Built. We just visited there actually over the holidays, the summer holidays. So it's great to actually see the rubber hit the road, you know, design where it's actually working and installed.
And so part of the reason we're showing this is obviously the first example is quite early on in our working history, very small project locally. We've done several big projects now around New Zealand. This is just an example of, we weren't doing all the buildings in this, but it was how do we help support the community interaction through even just the landscape design, coming back to how important that nature space is in a medium density in Hobsonville Point in Auckland. It's quite a different scenario. So it can be done at varying different levels.
Oh yeah, I'll speak to that one. So one of the design approaches that I haven't chatted about, and we've used it here for Ormata School when we designed the orchard, is over on the far left for you guys, is using holistic decision making. Is anyone familiar with that model? No. Yep. Couple of nods. Okay. So holistic decision making is really important, and we use it all the time for our own business and for community projects of any, you know, size really. And this is one, but we use it for most of our projects. So it's about creating an intention or a statement of purpose and all the enabling actions that creates a roadmap for a community to take it from here to there. And it also has a filtering process of making decisions, because so many design decisions, as Tristam was mentioning, have unforeseen consequences and they can be disastrous. So we really need to be very thoughtful and conscious with our design decision makings to ensure we have really positive, sustainable, and I would challenge even regenerative outcomes. So anyway, that's a bit of a side, but we use that for this project. It was a school-wide, right from the 5-year-olds up to the 13-year-olds, and it took a whole year. The children all researched, they designed, they created, they got immersed. There was maths involved and English. For a moment, it was a bit of a green school where everyone got very involved. And then I took those ideas, because one of the things the children couldn't do at 12 or 13, they had all these amazing ideas, but they didn't know how to synthesize it. So that's what I do. I help them with that process. Then the school community fundraised, and they built it, basically, and it was quite amazing. Next. Amazing process, very, very rich. And that's essentially turning, you can see the 2 photos at the top left there, what it looked like before, just marginal grassland turned into basically, you know, picking the fruit as you walk through to school, picking the herbs. Have so many children, parents and children, teachers actually, who say they now use the other car park just so they can walk through the orchard on the way to their classroom and pick a bit of sage for dinner on the way out, you know, when they leave. That's when it was first built. It's now kind of a bit more like a jungle. It's just an amazing play space. And we have an active garden club as well to keep that sustainable education going. Because for me, I'm incredibly passionate about that. I think a lot of clients come to me and they go, well, how do I grow my food? They don't know, they don't have the skills. But if we teach children right at the infancy, it's second nature. They don't think about it. They've just, you know, absorbed it by osmosis. Yeah. Cool.
So this next couple of slides, we could have got quite a few examples here, but we're involved in several eco villages and co-housing projects around New Zealand. We're about to start helping with Raglan Eco Village, which is looking to have about 50 homes in it. And so it's about taking those same concepts and looking at how do you apply those ideas to a large landscape to get the right outcomes. Where are you placing the houses? How are you putting your infrastructure? What water infrastructure you need? What shelter you need? What shared infrastructure? You can see, I'll get my pointer back out, that in most instances, you're always really separating the parking. That's a really key issue, which I think you guys at Green School will have done as well. This is a medium density, so creating mini pocket parks where you're creating smaller environments within the larger overall. So this is just an early concept. This is a developed concept prior to going to the developed design stage. We had 3D models that this was all made up of with full solar modeling, so that all placements of buildings and all infrastructure, you're planning for full solar access for every building in winter through summer. Did you want to say anything?
Wanted to say one thing again. So we draw on lots of modalities. You know, we're multidisciplinary. We don't just go, this is only what we do. So again, you know, these principles and this design approach, you can just take it and apply it. There's a co-housing group in New Plymouth actually that are in the process of developing co-housing project here. So yeah. So landscapes, this is my department. We have 2 in our team on this side, and I'm just going to run through some projects. Lauren wanted us to show some actual, you know, concrete examples of design being installed, because what often happens is things get diluted, so it's really satisfying as a designer. That's my son's word, actually. Everything's satisfying. So this project, I popped this one in because, I don't know, probably like many businesses, through the first lockdown, we went dead. And we were scrambling, thinking, wow, is this the end of us? You know, we've worked so hard to get here, and we're getting online and going digital. And then first day of the lockdown came off, the phones went hot. And what happened, I think, is that people, they decided what their priorities were. And if they had always been considering designing, you know, growing their food, they became concerned about food security. You know, some of the shelves were empty, so they wanted to create food gardens, and we've never really been busier. So this one is what we call a sketch design, and that's the other reason I put it in, because we want to make you know, growing food as accessible to as many people as possible, and it costs money to bring us on board. So this one is a sketch design, which we co-design with the client on site. It's drawn over top of aerials, so it's no frills, it's just about getting juicy information down. So I just wanted to share that one with you. They had a young family and has a food forest in there and edible gardens. This one is a lifestyle block, which we do as well. Next kind of size up. You can just pass that one on. And we lifestyle block, and then we did the edible gardens directly around the house. So permaculture principles are in all of these things about, you know, creating edge and working with the contour because it's the most productive areas, creating shelter, observing and getting feedback. All of those kind of permaculture principles are imbued in the work. Oh, there's a little flyover, so I'll just hopefully be able to talk over it if it's not too loud. Yeah, this one's in Uranui. So the reason I chose to put this one in is because we touched the project right from the big broad scale design right through to the eco garden smaller. It's a bit jittery, isn't it? We've got fodderbouts for the stock. There's a large lake which is pumped up, so where there's passive water supply through to the whole farm. That's the broad scale design. We did the install as well, so it's working with the contours of the landscape. Happy client. And then you can see the different layers and terraces. This was all north facing. That's a food forest at the front, integration of animals, food gardens directly around the house. So yeah, you can probably stop that one there. No, cool. Healthy Home Stand, that's you, I think. We also do farm design. I won't really talk a lot about that because our farm designer does that, and she's not here this evening, and this is one of her designs. But so it's working at that regenerative ag scale and really questioning our land use. In New Zealand, in Taranaki, and Venture Taranaki is great at this, is about looking at the diversity of crops, and we can grow so much more than grass in Taranaki. Just leave it at that.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so the thing that's currently taking up my time is a project that actually started partly as a result of that first lockdown. So it's no surprise to anyone that the building industry in New Zealand's in quite a bit of trouble in many ways. And so anyone that works in the industry or comes into contact with it, if they've got a design brain, starts thinking, what the hell can we do to help solve some of these problems? And so this came about really when the first lockdown came on. So when everyone else was pumping up their Netflix account and going to the beach, I went into 50-hour weeks coming up with the ideas that have been sitting in the back of my head for a few years. So it's really about making green homes accessible and affordable to more Kiwis across Aotearoa. In simple terms, most people don't have green homes. That's because, first of all, they believe they're more expensive, and in many instances they are. First of all, that's because it starts with custom design. Now, there's a reason that only 5% of homes in New Zealand are designed by architects. I'm not an architect, by the way, but it's because it's an expensive process. Custom design is an expensive process. I don't know when in New Zealand we decided that we'd buy a standard phone, we'd buy a standard car, we'd buy standard clothes, but damn it, we're going to have a custom house. I don't know where that idea came across, but it makes things expensive, and it actually makes things very inefficient and very poor performing. So this was a project about looking at how we can solve some of those. So here goes something I prepared earlier on.
I reckon it's crazy that in New Zealand we're still building pocket homes, averaging about 180 square metres for 2 full occupants, an industry that produces about 40% of country's natural waste. These homes are being constantly and poorly redesigned with huge expense, taking up heaps of time and stressing out buyers in the process and at prices that fewer and fewer Kiwis can afford. Reinventors' healthy home plans provide a fair way. All our plans incorporate small footprint, optimised layout with integrated storage, non-toxic material specification for a healthy living environment. Every design utilises waste reduction and minimises environmental impact. All our plans are home-star rated, meaning warm, dry homes with lower running costs. They're independently quantity survey costed, giving you budget confidence from the get-go, and we're making them available for around 80% less than cost and equivalent custom design service. Homes are such a core part of our communities and well-being, and we'd love for you to join us in creating a healthy home revolution.
So that gives you a bit of a really quick introduction to that, but we're at time, so I won't actually go deeper into that for now. But that gives you an idea of some of the things we're doing. With that project, we're doing a lot of things, including modular design. We've got building partnerships across New Zealand that we're just formalising to be able to control material shortages and deliver different material solutions depending on what materials are available, and still get the right outcomes in terms of healthy environments, high performance, low running costs, and reduced environmental impacts and better overall homes to live in. So, wrapping it up, I'll pass back.
Thanks so much, Bena and Dan. That was wonderful. We have run slightly over time for each of our presenters, which has cut into our Q&A time. But I think all of the presentations were so fantastic. I'd still like to take questions if anybody wants. Yeah.
It's a good question. The real answer is the market wants it. It's not. We don't need to convince anyone. So when I put my first post out on Facebook, and we didn't have a very big Facebook presence, we had 16,000 hits. So the market's looking for the solutions. The problem is that the market isn't currently providing them. It's not that the customers don't want it. I've been keeping away from social media. The first campaign that I ran when I was first looking at viability had 100,000 interactions. It's quite a lot. It's a big conversation, but essentially, most building companies are making money from complex roof shapes, from kickbacks from building suppliers. So a lot of the prices are driven actually from material suppliers, not so much from builders. So a lot of it's coming from that end. But there's not a lot of motivation from those companies, and that's why I started the talk with values based. If your focus is to make more money as a company, the reality is you can make really good money doing this and look after people, make more affordable homes that do better for the environment. But if your only focus is money, you're not going to be thinking like that.
Thanks. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh.
One of the things that Bena talked about was the holistic decision making. So both these guys talked about some of the unforeseen and unknowable outcomes. So that's one of the really useful tools for being able to plan to stay in alignment with your values and avoid unforeseen outcomes and start getting into generational thinking. So it's built up around your holistic planning. And you don't do that by having one point of focus. You have to be considering multiple things. And as an organization or business, it also protects the lives of the people that are running that project. So part of the planning is these guys will attest that it can take over your life. And so being able to have something in place that not only looks after the project, but looks after the well-being of the people planning the project, it's the only tool I've come across that does that.
Can I just add to that? So Dan Palmer is an amazing resource in New Zealand, and he's taken that holistic decision-making tool and created workshops that are for businesses, organisations, charities, individuals, whoever, to go through that process to protect the design intent and to protect the process, really. Does that answer your question? Not sure if it does. Can you rephrase the question? Yep. Yes. Are you saying if we design or somebody designs a property with permaculture in mind and then the next owner comes along and doesn't appreciate it? You probably can't, but what I have found is that those properties, they're harder to sell, but they're niche-y and they sell for more because those people that get it, they've got the filter, they know what they're looking at and they want it. That's what I've found from observation.
And part of it comes from educating the market. So one of the things we've talked about but haven't followed through with yet, we'd been asked by the local valuers organisation to come and do a talk to the valuers so that they can start understanding the financial value of the ecological and sustainable features of a landscape. As soon as people attribute a financial figure to those improvements, then you'll start to see a bit more of a change.
I can see Michael and Bena.
There was a slide in this that I took out that addressed sustainability and the question and the unpacking it, because it's a word that I use because people relate to it. It's become common enough, but I prefer, and it's not a panacea and it's not perfect, but regenerative, because we've got to be kaitiaki of our land. It's no use having the loop of just the status quo, sustaining what we've got. We need to regenerate. That's, when the biological diversity goes, we reintroduce kiwi or endemic species, or we actually need to self-regulate. There's just so much to unpack in that. But yeah, regenerative is probably the closest term that I find is better than sustainable. Yeah.
Michael's indicating Bena's covered that. Okay. One more.
I'd like to talk to that first. So this is a conversation that we've had a lot because design consultancy isn't a cheap thing to provide. We're usually the most cost-effective consultant on any of the projects, especially when the big ones we've run, when we're subcontracting architects and other people on big jobs, and we're still the cheapest consultant on the job. But where we've come to is I hope to both improve affordability with the housing project, but also create an income, because it's turning what was traditionally a high service industry into a more productivized solution, which creates a cash flow which we can then offer reduced prices to communities that are looking to grow their own food, etc. So those are some of the things we're looking to do as an impact enterprise to be able to do that. But it's the reality is, until you get to a stage that you're big enough that you've got that cash flow, like these guys have had their other businesses that have been able to allow them to do the work they've been able to do. You need that cash flow to be able to do it first. Most people can't work for free. No, but
Yeah, the best answer I could give to that, and we debate this a lot, God, we really need to put out our fees. We keep overrunning in time and not charging for it. But we take a Robin Hood approach to an impact enterprise. We subsidize for scholarships, etc. But the best thing you can do is do a permaculture course. So it's the cheapest way to get the information in a DIY manner. We run them, they run all over New Zealand, and it's amazing. You'll come away with your head just exploding with ideas and possibilities.
And also paying for some advice where you don't need it, because the money saved, that someone has the experience that can guide you towards a good outcome.
Fine. Oh, yeah. Hi, Daryl.
Everyone in this room. Yeah.
Mary?
I've always liked to say that It's working again. We've looked at it. One of the challenges with shipping containers, they can come at a lower cost, is it's a metal box. And you can spend a lot of money overcoming the fact that it's a metal box. And so it's not just condensation, there's all sorts of things that are happening. So you could come and have a chat to this man for quite a long time, and he'll probably tell you why it's a partial solution for some things, but it's not really a great living environment.
Final questions? We'll wrap it up because they might turn the mic off again. That was just so incredibly informative and interesting, and it has obviously, we've achieved the objective of sparking that thought and conversation, I think, obviously, based on the questions. So please hang around now, have a drink, have a chat amongst yourselves. The bar is open until they kick us out. And yes, sure. Yes, there is a recording, and the slides will be available too. Thank you very much to each of our speakers for coming and sharing their obvious huge wealth of knowledge and experience. We are so appreciative. Thank you also to the New Plymouth Sports Fishing and Underwater Club for, hopefully not kicking us out. And finally, thank you to everybody here for attending and for engaging. It's just fantastic. And I think, as Bena said, the change starts here in these conversations. That is how the groundswell sort of happens. So please, keep chatting, exchange contact details. As a final quick housekeeping note, please, just in the spirit of sustainability, I don't think this is regenerative, actually, more just like waste management. Can you leave your name tags just on the front table? Because we do reuse those. I'll close the formal session here with a karakia. Please join with me if you know it. Unahia, unahia, unahia ki te uru tapanui, ki o wātia, ki mama, te nāko, te tinana, te wairua, I te ara takatu. Koe rā e rongo, whakairea aki ki ronga, ki o wātia, ai rā ku wātia. Paumarie. Thank you, everyone.